He wasn't supposed to stay in that cabin, not with the way the wind whispered through the broken walls like it knew his name. And yet the dog refused to step away from the door, as if something inside was calling them both to stay. The road that led there stretched nearly 2 miles off the main highway. Nothing but dry dirt and scattered brush under a pale desert sky. The kind of place most folks in town only pointed at from a distance, usually followed by a laugh and a shake of the head. And that's exactly what they did when Ethan Cole pulled up in his old truck with everything he owned rattling in the back and a German shepherd sitting tall in the passenger seat like he belonged there more than anyone else. The laughter wasn't loud at first, just a few low chuckles from the gas station porch, then a voice cutting through the dry air saying, "That place'll bury you, man." And another adding, 5 days, maybe less. Like they were placing bets on a man already written off. Ethan didn't answer, not because he didn't hear them, but because he had heard worse. The kind of silence that comes after loss, the kind that follows you home and sits at the edge of your bed long after the world thinks you've moved on. He stepped out of the truck, boots pressing into the gravel, the sun hanging low and heavy, and the dog, Rex, moved with him, steady, alert, amber eyes scanning the empty horizon before locking onto the cabin like it wasn't abandoned at all, but waiting. The wood was gray with age, the porch sagging just enough to warn off anyone looking for comfort, windows clouded with dust, and a front door that creaked open before Ethan even touched it, pushed gently by a breeze that smelled faintly of rust and something older, something buried. Rex didn't bark, didn't hesitate, just stood there, muscles tight beneath his coat, ears forward, listening to something Ethan couldn't hear yet. Inside, the air was cooler, thick, the kind that settles into your lungs and makes you aware of every breath. And the floor groaned under Ethan's weight as he stepped in, setting down a duffel bag that held more memories than clothes, while Rex moved slowly across the room, nose low, tracing lines in the dust like he was reading a story written long before they arrived. Outside, the laughter had already faded, replaced by the distant hum of a passing truck and the quiet certainty that no one expected to see him again anytime soon. But Ethan didn't turn back, didn't second guess, because something about the way Rex stood in the center of that room, still as a statue yet alive with purpose, told him this wasn't just a place to survive the next few days. This was something else entirely, something waiting to be uncovered. And for the first time since he'd left everything behind, Ethan felt it too. Not hope exactly, not yet, but a pull, quiet and steady, like a promise you don't understand until it's already begun. The first night settles in without ceremony, no grand storm, no warning, just a slow drop in temperature as the sun disappears behind the flat horizon and leaves the cabin wrapped in a quiet that feels heavier than silence. And Ethan Cole sits on the worn wooden floor with his back against the wall, boots still on, a canteen by his side, listening to the structure breathe like it has been holding something in for years, while Rex does not lie down, does not relax, but instead paces the perimeter in a slow, deliberate pattern, nose brushing along the seams of the walls, pausing at corners as if marking them in his mind. Outside, the desert stretches empty for miles, the nearest neighbor a good 15-minute drive down a road that barely deserves to be called one, and the only light comes from a flickering bulb overhead that hums faintly, casting shadows that shift with every movement of the dog. And Ethan watches him, not with concern, but with the kind of attention a man learns when he has survived by trusting instinct over explanation. He reaches into his duffel and pulls out a small metal object, a set of worn dog tags, letting them rest in his palm for a moment before closing his hand around them again. The faint clink barely audible, but enough for Rex to pause and glance back, their eyes meeting in that quiet understanding that does not need words. Hours pass without much change, the air cooling further, the scent inside the cabin settling into something sharper, like old iron and dry wood, and every now and then, a soft creak moves through the floorboards, not sudden, not alarming, just present, like footsteps that forgot where they were going. On the second day, the light comes in thin through the dusty windows, painting the room in a pale gold that does little to warm it, and Ethan steps outside to take in the land, measuring it the way he used to measure terrain, counting distance, noting elevation, scanning for anything out of place. But all he finds is emptiness and the distant hum of wind moving through brush, while behind him Rex remains at the doorway, not crossing the threshold, his body angled inward, attention fixed on the same spot he lingered on the night before. By midday, Ethan begins clearing space, moving broken boards, sweeping away dust, establishing order where he can, because routine is the closest thing to control. And yet every time he turns his back, Rex returns to that same section of the floor near the far wall, sitting, then standing, then lowering his head to sniff again, as if the scent is fading and he cannot afford to lose it. On the third day, the town's laughter feels farther away, replaced by something else, something quieter but more persistent, and Ethan notices that Rex has started to skip meals, nudging the bowl once before stepping away, his focus elsewhere, his energy held in reserve. And that is when Ethan kneels beside him, running a hand along the thick fur at his neck, feeling the tension there, the coiled alertness that never quite releases, and he says softly, almost to himself, "You see something I do not, do you?" Not expecting an answer, but Rex gives one anyway in the only way he can, by returning to that same spot and pressing his paw lightly against the floor, not digging yet, just marking it, patient, insistent. By the fourth night, the cabin feels less empty and more watchful, the kind of place that listens back, and Ethan stops trying to ignore it, instead sitting in the center of the room with the lights off, letting the dark settle naturally, letting his breathing slow to match the rhythm of the place. And in that stillness, he begins to notice it too, not a sound exactly, not something you can point to, but a difference, a subtle shift in how the air rests in that corner. How the floor seems slightly cooler there, how even the faint hum of the bulb does not quite reach it the same way. Rex moves closer, standing beside him, shoulder brushing against Ethan's arm, steady, grounded, and together they face that section of the room without speaking, without rushing, because whatever is there has been there longer than either of them, and it is not going anywhere. On the fifth morning, before the sun fully rises, Rex is already awake, already in position, and this time when he lowers his head, he does not hesitate, his paw scraping once, then again, the sound sharp against the quiet, and Ethan exhales slowly, not in surprise, but in acceptance, as if he knew this moment was coming the second they stepped through that door, and without a word, he reaches for the old tool leaning against the wall, the wood worn smooth by hands that came before him, and walks toward the place the dog has chosen. Because some things are not found by chance, they are led to, one quiet step at a time. The first strike of metal against wood echoes sharper than Ethan expects, a clean, hollow note that does not belong to a solid floor, and he pauses, not because of doubt, but because the sound answers a question he had not fully asked yet. Rex steps back just enough to give him space, but his eyes never leave the spot, ears forward, body still, as if this moment has been building long before either of them arrived. And Ethan lowers the tool again, slower this time, prying at the seam between two warped planks where the grain has split just slightly wider than the rest, subtle, easy to miss unless you were looking for something that did not want to be found. The wood resists at first, then gives with a dry crack, lifting just enough to reveal darkness beneath, not deep, not endless, but intentional, a space carved with purpose. And a faint breath of cooler air rises from it, carrying a scent that is different from the rest of the cabin, less like decay and more like something preserved, sealed away. Ethan sets the tool aside and crouches lower, fingers brushing the edge of the opening, feeling the smoothness of cut wood beneath the rough surface layer, a deliberate construction hidden under years of neglect. And Rex leans in beside him, nose hovering just above the gap, drawing in that scent again with quiet certainty. "All right," Ethan murmurs, his voice low, steady, not surprised anymore, just present, and he works the plank further until it lifts free, setting it gently aside, revealing a shallow compartment no more than 2 feet across, lined with aged boards that have held their shape better than the rest of the structure. As if protected, inside sits a metal box, rectangular, dull with time, but intact, its surface marked by faint scratches and a thin layer of dust that suggests it has not been touched in years, maybe longer. And for a moment Ethan does not reach for it, not out of fear, but out of respect for the weight of what it might hold, because things that are hidden this carefully are rarely simple. Rex lets out a soft exhale, almost a nudge without contact, and that is enough. Ethan slides his hands into the space, gripping the sides of the box, surprised by its weight as he lifts it up and sets it on the floor beside him, the metal cool against his palms even in the dry warmth of the room. There is no lock, only a latch worn smooth, and when he flips it open, the sound is quiet, almost reluctant, like the box itself has grown used to staying closed. Inside, there is no gold, no cash, nothing that glints in the light, just a stack of papers bound together with a faded strap, a small leather notebook, and beneath them, what looks like old photographs, their edges curled slightly with age. Ethan lifts the top bundle carefully. The page is yellowed but still firm, and as his eyes move across the first lines, something in his posture changes, not tension, not shock, but recognition, the kind that comes when a story begins to make sense in a way you did not expect. Rex sits beside him now, no longer searching, no longer restless, his job in this moment complete, watching not the box, but Ethan, as if the truth inside matters more to the man than the discovery itself. Outside, the wind picks up just slightly, brushing against the cabin walls with a soft, steady rhythm, and for the first time since they arrived, the place does not feel like it is holding its breath anymore, but releasing it, as though whatever had been buried beneath that floor was never meant to stay hidden forever, only waiting for someone who would listen long enough, trust deeply enough, and stay when others would have turned back. And Ethan, sitting there with dust on his hands and a quiet dog at his side, understands without needing to say it that this is only the beginning of something far larger than a forgotten cabin in the middle of nowhere. The paper does not tremble in Ethan's hands, but something inside him shifts as his eyes move slowly across the faded ink, each line measured, each word deliberate, like it had been written by someone who knew it might be read long after they were gone. And the room grows quieter not because the wind has stopped, but because Ethan is no longer listening to it, his attention pulled inward, anchored to the story unfolding in front of him. The first few pages read like records, names, dates, property lines drawn in careful script, but beneath that order there is something else, something that does not belong in simple documentation, patterns repeating where they should not, signatures that appear too often, and always tied to the same piece of land. This land, the one people in town laughed about like it was cursed or worthless, and Ethan exhales slowly, not in disbelief, but in recognition of something he has seen before in different forms, systems built to hide truth in plain sight. Rex remains close, seated now, his presence steady, not searching anymore, as if he knows the discovery has shifted from instinct to understanding, and Ethan reaches for the small leather notebook beneath the stack, its surface worn smooth, edges softened by time, and when he opens it the handwriting changes, less formal, more human, entries written day by day, thoughts pressed into the page with quiet urgency. He reads about a man who lived here years ago, someone who noticed things that did not add up, shipments that passed through without record, land transfers that happened too quickly, too quietly, and always involving the same handful of names that appear again and again like echoes. And Ethan pauses at one entry, where the words grow heavier, the ink pressed deeper into the paper as if the writer had felt the weight of what he was uncovering. Describing how the cabin had been used not as a home, but as a place to store things that were not meant to be seen, documents, agreements, evidence of decisions made far from this desert, but hidden here because no one thought to look. Outside, the light has shifted, the sun climbing higher, casting sharper lines through the dusty windows, illuminating particles in the air that drift slowly, almost peacefully. In contrast to the growing tension inside Ethan's chest, not fear, not yet, but awareness, the kind that settles in when you realize you are no longer just passing through a place. You are part of its story now. He flips to the photographs at the bottom of the box, careful, respectful, and studies them one by one. Old images of the cabin when it was still intact, vehicles parked out front, men standing in small groups, faces partially turned away from the camera as if they did not expect to be remembered. And yet here they are, frozen in time, and Ethan leans closer, eyes narrowing slightly as recognition begins to form, not of the individuals themselves, but of the kind of men they represent. The same type he has seen in towns like this before, clean on the surface, influential, The ones who speak the loudest when they want something to stay buried. Rex shifts beside him, not restless, just present, his shoulder brushing lightly against Ethan's arm, grounding him in the moment. And Ethan closes the notebook slowly, resting his hand on top of it, feeling the weight not just of the object but of the truth it carries. And for a long second he says nothing, the silence stretching but not empty, filled with the quiet understanding that whatever this cabin had been used for, whatever had been hidden beneath its floor, was not an accident, and neither was the way people had tried to laugh it off, dismiss it, keep others away. He looks around the room again, seeing it differently now, not as a broken shelter, but as a place that had held secrets long enough to outlive the people who buried them. And in that realization there is no rush, no sudden plan, just a steady, grounded clarity, the kind that comes when a man decides not to walk away. And Rex, without being told, lowers himself to the floor beside him, finally, resting, as if the waiting part of their journey is over and something else has quietly begun. By late afternoon, the heat settles heavier against the cabin walls, pressing in through the cracks as if the desert itself is leaning closer, listening. And Ethan sits at the small table he cleared earlier, the papers spread out in front of him in careful order, not rushed, not chaotic, but deliberate, the way he used to map out routes before a mission, every detail placed where it can be seen, understood, and connected. Rex lies near the doorway now, not asleep, never fully asleep, his head resting on his paws but his eyes half open, watching both Ethan and the empty stretch beyond the porch, a quiet guardian between two worlds, and every so often his ears twitch toward the distance, catching sounds too faint for human notice. Ethan reads through the documents again, slower this time, tracing names with his finger, noting how often they repeat, how they link to parcels of land, to transfers that make no sense unless you stop believing in coincidence. And the deeper he goes, the clearer it becomes that this place was not abandoned because it was worthless, but because it had served its purpose, because the people who used it believed no one would stay long enough to question anything beneath the surface. He leans back slightly, letting the chair creak under his weight, and exhales through his nose, a steady breath, the kind that keeps thoughts from racing, because what sits in front of him is not just history. It is something that still has roots in the present, something that touches the town, the same town that laughed when he arrived, the same voices that dismissed this cabin like it was already forgotten. Rex lifts his head suddenly, not in alarm, but in attention, eyes narrowing toward the road that cuts through the open land about half a mile out, and Ethan follows the direction of his gaze, stepping quietly toward the doorway, the sunlight now low enough to cast long shadows across the dirt, and there, barely visible at first, is the faint outline of a vehicle slowing down where the road bends. Not passing through, not continuing on, just pausing for a moment longer than necessary before moving again. Ethan does not react outwardly, does not step forward or call out. He simply watches until the dust settles back into stillness, then turns back inside without a word, because he understands that not all attention is accidental, and not all curiosity is harmless. He returns to the table, gathers the papers into a tighter stack, and slides them back into the metal box. But this time he does not close the lid immediately, his hand resting on the edge as he looks down at the contents, weighing not their value but their consequence. And Rex moves closer, standing now beside him, steady as ever, his presence grounding the moment. "We are not the only ones who know about this," Ethan says quietly, not as a question, but as a fact spoken into the space, and Rex's tail gives a slow, single movement against the floor, not restless, not afraid, just acknowledging. The light shifts again, softer now, the beginning of evening settling in, and the cabin feels different, not lighter, but clearer, as if the air itself has decided to stop hiding things. And Ethan closes the box at last, securing the latch with a firm, quiet click, then stands and walks it over to a different corner of the room, not the place it was found, but somewhere new, somewhere chosen, because some truths, once uncovered, are not meant to be buried again in the same place. Outside, the wind picks up slightly, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant heat, and somewhere far off a truck passes along the highway, its sound fading quickly into the open distance, leaving behind the same quiet that has followed Ethan since he arrived. But now it feels less like isolation and more like a boundary, a line between what the world believes about this place and what actually lives beneath it. And Ethan, standing there with Rex at his side, knows without needing to say it that whatever happens next will not come with noise or warning, but it will come because truth, once uncovered, does not stay still for long. The sixth morning arrives without color, the sky washed pale as if the desert itself has decided to hold its breath, and Ethan is already awake before the first light fully settles across the land, sitting near the window with the metal box resting beside him, unopened but no longer ignored, his hand resting lightly on its surface as if feeling for something beneath the steel. Rex stands at the doorway again, not restless, not pacing, but fixed, his body angled outward this time, ears sharpened toward the road that cuts across the horizon. And there is a stillness in him that is different from before, no longer searching but anticipating, like a soldier who has already heard the distant approach of something others have not yet noticed. The air carries a faint vibration, not a sound at first, more like a shift in pressure. And then it becomes clearer, the low hum of an engine somewhere beyond the bend, steady, controlled, not passing through but coming closer with purpose. Ethan does not rush, does not react with surprise. He simply stands, lifting the box and moving it further back into the cabin, placing it beneath a loose board near the wall where the shadows fall thicker, not hiding it in fear, but repositioning it with intent. Because some things are not meant to be displayed before their time. Rex glances back once, meeting Ethan's eyes, and there is no panic there, only readiness, the kind that does not need to be spoken. And when Ethan steps out onto the porch, the wood creaks softly beneath his boots, the sound carrying just enough to mark his presence without announcing it. The vehicle appears slowly, emerging from the heat shimmer about a quarter-mile out, a dark truck moving at a deliberate pace, tires pressing into the dry earth without kicking up unnecessary dust, and it stops a short distance away, not close enough to intrude, not far enough to ignore. The engine idles for a moment, then cuts, leaving behind a silence that feels heavier than before, and a man steps out, mid-50s, clean shirt, measured posture, the kind of presence that belongs to someone used to being listened to without raising his voice. He does not approach immediately, instead standing beside the truck as if giving the moment time to settle, then begins walking toward the cabin with steady, unhurried steps, his eyes scanning the structure, the porch, the open doorway, and finally Ethan. Rex remains at Ethan's side, not growling, not baring teeth, just standing firm, his body aligned with Ethan's in a quiet line of defense that needs no display. The man stops a few feet from the base of the porch, looking up slightly, his expression calm but not warm. And when he speaks, his voice carries evenly through the dry air. You are staying longer than most. Not a question, not quite a warning, more like an observation placed carefully between them. Ethan rests his weight evenly, shoulders relaxed but unmoving, and answers just as quietly. I tend to finish what I start. And the words hang there, simple, but carrying more meaning than either man chooses to explain. The visitor glances briefly at Rex, taking in the dog's stillness, the focus in his eyes, then back to Ethan, and there is a small shift in his expression, not surprise, but calculation, as if reassessing something that no longer fits his expectations. This place has a history, the man says after a moment, his gaze drifting toward the edges of the cabin, the worn boards, the quiet ground beneath it. Most people prefer not to get involved with it, and Ethan gives the faintest nod, acknowledging the truth without agreeing to the warning. Because he has already stepped beyond that line. The wind moves lightly between them, carrying the scent of dust and sun-warmed wood. And for a long second neither man speaks, the silence stretching but not breaking, until Rex shifts his weight slightly, a subtle movement that draws the man's attention again, and something unspoken passes through that glance. Not threat, not fear, but recognition of something that cannot be persuaded or dismissed. The man exhales softly, almost imperceptible, then turns his head back toward the road, as if measuring distance, timing, possibilities, before looking once more at Ethan and saying, "Just remember, some things stay buried for a reason." And without waiting for a reply, he steps back, turning toward the truck with the same measured pace he arrived with. Ethan does not call after him, does not move from the porch. He simply watches until the engine starts again and the vehicle pulls away, disappearing slowly into the open stretch of land. And only when the sound fades completely does Rex relax his stance, not lowering his guard entirely, but shifting from readiness to presence. And Ethan finally exhales, a quiet release, because the waiting is no longer abstract. It has taken shape, spoken words, and driven away on four wheels, leaving behind a certainty that whatever has been uncovered beneath this cabin is no longer just history. It is something that others still recognize, still protect in silence, and now, so does he. The rest of the day does not rush forward. It stretches, slow and deliberate, as if time itself has decided to watch what Ethan will do next, and he does not waste it on hesitation. He moves with quiet purpose, gathering the documents again, not to hide them, but to understand them fully, spreading them across the table in a more precise order than before, aligning dates, matching names, tracing patterns that no longer feel distant or abstract, but immediate, connected to the man who just stood at the edge of his porch and spoke in careful warnings. Rex remains close, not at the doorway this time, but near the table, his body angled toward Ethan, his presence less about guarding the outside and more about anchoring the inside, as if the true weight of this moment is not what might come from the road, but what has already been uncovered within these walls. Ethan flips through the photographs again, slower, more focused, studying faces, posture, small details that others might overlook. A ring on a hand, a truck in the background, the way one man stands slightly apart from the others, not leading, not following, but observing, and something about that stance feels familiar, not from memory, but from instinct, the same instinct that kept him alive in places where certainty was a luxury. He sets the photograph aside and returns to the notebook, reading deeper into the entries, past the initial observations and into the later pages where the handwriting grows tighter, more urgent, describing visits from men who did not introduce themselves, questions that were never answered directly, and a growing awareness that the cabin was no longer just a place of discovery, but a place being watched. Outside, the sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the desert floor, stretching the shape of the cabin outward like it is reaching for something beyond itself, and Ethan pauses for a moment, looking up from the page, listening, not for sound, but for change, because he has learned that danger does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply shifts the air in a way that only those paying attention will notice. Rex lifts his head slightly, mirroring that awareness, his ears catching something faint again, not as close as before, but present. A distant engine, then another, separate, moving along different paths, not converging yet, but circling the same area like pieces being placed on a board. Ethan closes the notebook slowly, resting his hand on it for a second longer than necessary, then gathers everything back into the metal box with careful precision, not rushed, not frantic, just certain. And this time when he secures the latch, there is a finality to it, not the end of discovery, but the beginning of action. He carries the box to the center of the room, no longer hiding it in shadow, no longer placing it beneath boards or behind walls, but setting it down in the open where it can be seen, where it exists not as something buried, but as something acknowledged. And Rex watches this shift without moving, his calm steady, as if he understands that the nature of what they are protecting has changed. Ethan steps back, looking at the cabin again, really looking this time, seeing not just the structure but the story it has held, the silence it has been forced to keep, and the way that silence is beginning to break without a single raised voice. The light outside dims further, the sky turning a deeper shade, and the faint glow of headlights appears in the distance. Then another, separated by space but connected by direction, both moving slower now, more deliberate, and Ethan does not step outside to meet them. He does not reach for anything defensive. He simply stands where he is, shoulders relaxed, gaze steady, because this is no longer about avoiding attention. It is about standing in it without being moved. Rex rises then, stepping to Ethan's side, his body aligned once more, not tense, not aggressive, just present in the way that only a creature without doubt can be. And together they face the quiet approach of whatever is coming, not with fear, not with defiance, but with the calm certainty of those who have already chosen their ground. and are no longer willing to leave it behind. The headlights do not rush in. They glide slowly across the open land, cutting through the dimming light with a steady glow that feels more deliberate than threatening. And Ethan remains where he is, standing inside the cabin with the box in plain sight, his posture unchanged, his breathing even, while Rex stands beside him, unmoving, eyes fixed on the approaching vehicles as if measuring not distance, but intent. The first truck stops about 30 yards from the porch, the second a little farther back, their engines idling for a moment before going quiet one by one, leaving behind a stillness that presses gently against the walls. And when the doors open, the sound carries clearly in the evening air, not abrupt, not aggressive, just present, like footsteps in a place that has been quiet too long. Two men step forward from the first vehicle, dressed in the kind of simple clothing that blends into any town without drawing attention. But their movements are too controlled, too precise to be casual, and a third figure remains near the second truck, watching from a distance without approaching, as if this is not his role. Not yet. Ethan does not step outside to meet them. He does not invite them in. He simply waits, letting them close the space on their own terms. And when they reach the base of the porch, they stop, not crossing the threshold, not testing the boundary that has already been drawn without words. One of the men speaks first, his voice calm, almost courteous. "We heard you might have found something." And the sentence hangs there, carefully shaped, not a demand, not an accusation, but a statement that expects acknowledgement. Ethan tilts his head slightly, just enough to meet the man's eyes fully, and answers without hesitation, "I found what was left behind." And there is no pride in his tone, no challenge, just truth laid plainly between them. Rex shifts his weight subtly, stepping half a pace forward, not threatening, not blocking, but present in a way that reminds everyone standing there that this space is not empty, not unguarded. The second man glances briefly at the dog, then back at Ethan, his expression tightening for just a second before smoothing again, and he says, "That box does not belong to you." Not as a warning, but as a line drawn from a different perspective, one that assumes ownership extends beyond time and absence. Ethan lets the silence stretch for a moment, not out of defiance, but to let the weight of the words settle, then responds quietly. Neither did the truth inside it. And something shifts in the air then, not tension exactly, but recognition, the kind that comes when a conversation moves beyond negotiation into something more final. The man on the porch exhales slowly, his gaze drifting past Ethan into the cabin, taking in the worn boards, the open space, the box resting where it can be seen. And for a moment his posture softens, not in surrender, but in understanding that whatever they expected to find here is no longer hidden, no longer uncertain. Behind him, the third figure near the truck steps forward slightly, not approaching fully, but enough to be seen more clearly. And as the fading light catches the side of his face, there is a quiet realization that passes between the men, subtle but undeniable, as if they are no longer deciding what to do, but how much has already been decided without them. Rex remains still, his presence steady, his eyes never leaving the closest man, and Ethan does not move either, not stepping forward, not stepping back. Because this is not a moment that can be forced, it can only be held. The wind moves lightly across the open land, brushing against the cabin, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and something older, something that has waited long enough to be seen. And in that quiet, the first man nods once, almost to himself, before speaking again, softer now. "Some things were never meant to surface." And Ethan's reply comes just as calm, just as steady. "They already have." And there is nothing more added. No explanation, no argument, just the simple truth standing in the open. Between them, as undeniable as the fading light and the steady presence of a man and his dog who chose to stay when others would have turned away. The silence after the words lingers longer than anything that came before it, not tense, not fragile, but settled, like dust finally choosing where to fall. And for a moment no one moves. The men on the porch, the figure by the truck, and Ethan standing inside the cabin with Rex at his side, all held in the same quiet understanding that something has shifted beyond control, beyond persuasion. The wind passes through again, softer now, carrying the dry scent of earth and wood that no longer feels empty but grounded, and the first man lowers his gaze briefly, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement of a line that cannot be redrawn. Then steps back from the porch without another word, his movement mirrored by the second man, both turning in a way that suggests not retreat, but conclusion, as if the purpose that brought them here has already been answered without needing to be spoken aloud. The third figure lingers a second longer, his eyes resting on the cabin, then on Rex, and finally on Ethan. And there is something quieter in that look, not resistance, not agreement, but recognition, before he turns as well and walks back toward the truck. The engines start again, one after the other, low and steady, and the vehicles pull away without urgency, without looking back, disappearing into the same open stretch of land they came from, leaving behind only the faint hum of distance and the wide stillness of the desert settling back into place. Ethan does not move right away. He remains where he is, shoulders relaxed, eyes on the horizon until the last trace of motion is gone, and only then does he step forward onto the porch, the wood creaking beneath him in a familiar rhythm, Rex following at his side, no longer rigid, no longer on edge, but calm in a way that feels earned rather than assumed. The evening light fades into a deeper shade, the sky stretching wide above them. And for the first time since he arrived, Ethan allows himself to look at the cabin not as a question, not as a challenge, but as something that has chosen him as much as he chose it. A place that did not need saving, only someone willing to stay long enough to listen. He turns back inside, the room quiet, the box still resting where he left it, no longer hidden, no longer out of reach, and he walks over to it without hesitation, placing his hand on the metal surface again, feeling its weight not as a burden, but as a responsibility that no one else claimed. Rex settles nearby, lowering himself onto the floor with a slow exhale, his body finally at rest, eyes still open but soft, watching Ethan not for instruction, but for presence, as if the bond between them has shifted too, from survival to something steadier, something rooted. Outside, the night deepens, the faint sound of the highway barely reaching this far, and the cabin holds its silence differently now, not as something hiding, but as something complete, and Ethan moves through the space with quiet intention, setting the box back on the table, adjusting the chair,